Bob Cymber, welcome to Stay Humble podcast. How are you feeling today?
Hey, thanks for having me, David. I really appreciate it, and I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation too. And firstly, Bob, I want to ask you is how did you first discover Stoicism?
Well, David, it was kind of a more of a long journey. It was kind of a deep dive. I really didn't have any other choice. At 10 years old, I was diagnosed with a clinical panic disorder, and kind of throughout my life, I struggled with mental health. And when I went to university, when I went to college as an undergrad in philosophy, I was required to read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. And I don't even think it was the whole book. I think it was just part of book two, I think, right after he gives his gratitude in book one. And it was kind of off to the races, so to speak, after that. I learned that it coupled well with my anxiety in a way that going to kind of clinical settings, like a one-on-one with a clinical psychologist, I felt like Stoicism just armed me with tools that really helped me and were very applicable, not just theoretical, pie in the sky sorts of, tenets, but they're actually things that I could apply while walking and experiencing my day. And not, Stoicism doesn't require us to necessarily sit and stare at a wall with our back up straight for hours on end, right?
Yeah.
And that was really attractive to me, and that was sort of my intro to Stoicism, and that was when I was 19, so that would have been about 11 years ago. So
Oh wow.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I'll be honest with myself, like I kind of got into Stoicism since 2019, and I came across it from a book called The Little Book of Stoicism. I don't know if you've heard of that one by Jonas Salzberg. I can't say his second name.
I've not. I'll have to check it
No.
out.
It was just a basic book like that I'd seen on Kindle and read it, and then obviously from there I led on to reading sort of your daily Stoics. A previous guest on this show, Jay Bell, had suggested that to me to start of getting into reading it daily Stoic from there, and then obviously from that, obviously you jump into all the Ryan Holiday, you fall into that sort of the obstacle is the way, and ego is the enemy, and stillness is the key. And then obviously, like from there, that's how I've really took to reading them sort of books and following them things. So that was my sort of first introduction into that sort of stuff. And I wanted to just say, in terms of a lot of people, obviously during the beginning of lockdowns, turn to Stoicism. Particularly, one of the things that I've heard quite a lot recently was that Meditations by Marcus Aurelius was sold out on Amazon and places like that. Why do you feel that people turn to Stoicism during that time?
You know, I really think that, especially in a time of crisis, especially in a time of kind of forced isolation in some cases, I really think that that is sort of the impetus to growth. I really think that that is a catalyst for researching about things that people might otherwise not have been exposed to. And I really think that the market has been ready for Marcus Aurelius. And that's something that I've been really excited about in the last couple of years. And during lockdown, again, people have been isolated. There was a lot of, I heard that Home Depot, the stocks for a lot of these, do-it-yourself types of companies and businesses, they've been kind of skyrocketing because, people have had more time just indoors and away from people. And comparing Marcus Aurelius to Epictetus and to Musonius Rufus and to Seneca, I really am a believer of the intimacy of Marcus Aurelius in the fact that we have an example of a Roman emperor we basically have his diary, his personal journal that he kept for himself. And I'm constantly reminded, David, every single time it seems that I open up Marcus Aurelius, the Meditations, I'm reminded that he's writing this for himself. Because sometimes, that would change everything, because we read about some stuff in passages and books and we think, wow, that's kind of harsh, right? We would think, oh, especially in philosophy and self-help, it's like, oh man, this guy, he's really got the fire started. But when we remind ourselves that he's actually doing this to be disciplined in his own right, that really, to me, and this is why I think to a lot of readers, I think that changes everything. That perspective of that he's not just spouting these pronouncements and principles to anyone to follow. He's really saying, Marcus Aurelius, you, Roman emperor, hey, guy who hates to be at court, guy who didn't really even want to be a philosopher in the first place, who's kind of born into it. You need to be, susceptible with accepting the principles. And that's where I think the true power of meditations comes into play, is that Marcus sees his true, it's almost the Christian, we were talking before, it's almost the Christian idea of human fallibility, human, the lack for humans to not live to their full potential. And I think Marcus, even a Roman emperor, saw that. And that's what I think is really resonating with people. I mean, let alone all the great advice that he gives in the book. I think that the story and really the reason why Marcus wrote it, I think that that's really, really groundbreaking and profound. So.
And it's crazy to think as well, like when he wrote Meditations as well, as an emperor, he went through a pandemic of a kind as well at that time.
Yes, the plague, yes.
And it just seems like to have like going through a place, going through wars, being the emperor of Rome, like you say, to deal with all them things and still be able to document that as a diary of his life and be able to pass on that wisdom is quite remarkable. And during them times, would you think, Bob?
Yeah. I think that him going through the Antonine Plague is really, really it resonates with people, because people, David, here's the interesting thing. A lot of times people today, when we talk about lockdowns, when we talk about, wow, we're not used to this, people being used to it. When we read Marcus Aurelius in his passages about, he talks about, I think it's in book 4, he talks about looking at the totality of human history and seeing that really when we look at the totality, things that happen to us, they're really not out of the ordinary. And, you hear pundits on NPR and a lot of these news sources talk about the 1918 plague, when we had that the last pandemic. And it's really not that long ago when we look at human history. And Marcus Aurelius is a great example of talking about, hey man, this isn't really a big deal like we make it out to be. And that's another kind of profound connection between Marcus Aurelius and specifically the pandemic that he went through.
Yeah, and obviously touching on like the Stoic readings and stuff, at that time, I think it just made me realise, which you would probably agree with, is that we can only control what the controllables in terms of that situation. We can't control the virus, we can't control, about the lockdowns and the fault, like you can't change them things. All you can control is yourself, nothing else.
Yeah, and that's the brilliant opening. Part 1 of both the Discourses of Epictetus and the first passage of the Enchiridion talks about the dichotomy of control. And definitely, I think you're spot on with saying, a pandemic that's so far removed from any individual's control. And honestly, even a collective society's control. How we respond, we hear governments, a lot of South American governments. We talk about some Southeast Asian governments, how we respond to the pandemic. That's a different story in a lot of cases. But when it talks about prevention and, obviously we can't control nature. And that's one of the big realizations that Stoicism sort of gives the individual to empower us. So yeah.
I would definitely agree. And obviously I've heard you on previous appearances as a guest on other podcasts. And obviously we share a very similar upbringing in terms that we're both brought up Catholic. And obviously you mentioned about Stoicism is that it blows Christianity's advice out the water for the listeners. And for the listeners and watchers, why do you believe this?
Well, it's not really, I should be really transparent to say that not everything in religious upbringing is detrimental. Not everything is, going to sink a person's spirit. In a lot of ways, Christianity has, Catholicism in particular, us sharing that experience. There are a lot of good things that come from Catholicism, that come from the Gospels, that come from Jesus and the apostles and sort of those commentaries. What I think heavily lacks in Catholicism and Christianity that Stoicism definitely makes up for is the application and also the mindsets of the mind about how to think about stuff. And I say stuff like really Frankl like that, because obviously in life, when you say one person's stuff is another person's catastrophe, one person's what they think is mental stuff is another person's, triumph with a new stage in life, whether that be a birth of a new child or, a new house in some cases with material things. When it comes to Catholicism teaches a lot of times that the individual, or implies, I shouldn't say explicitly, but implies that the individual without a almighty power is heavily lacking. And Stoicism, I think that one of its principles is we have this sort of rationality and this reason that has been given to us by what the Stoics call God. They also equate God with nature and God with the universe. Different type of God, more of a deistic God of the Stoics. They say that humans have this sort of special rationality that sets us away from, other animals, which of course science has been updating a lot of the outlooks of that today, which is one of the things that why Massimo Pigliucci, for example, and Larry Becker think that Stoicism should be updated. But with Stoicism, with this rationality, we really have the power to, in a sense, accept our destiny and also to make these strives to improve our situation. And it really gets hairy, David, philosophically, with Stoicism, when it comes to this amor fati, accept our fate, and this sort of we can control our will. That is what Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius say. That is one of the things that's in our control. And I like that Stoicism is transparent about that. I feel like Catholicism almost puts that on a back burner. It kind of sweeps those types of things under the rug. Catholicism has that same sort of issue. We think that, in Catholicism and Christianity, humans were born with free will, right? This is kind of the limit, the freedom that God gives humans. But really, when you look at it, if God controls the universe, he limits himself, arguably, to give humans that free will in order to make choices for themselves. And so a lot of the issues come from both sides, actually, when it comes to humans and free will. It's a very kind of complex and convoluted situation about how both those types of philosophies and religion on Catholicism side tries to justify that. And I find that is very interesting from a philosophical perspective. But I really think that the equipment, these sort of ammo, so to speak, that Stoicism arms the individual, I think that is so much more transparent and more obvious than what, say, something from Catholicism does. So yeah. That's kind of a long-winded answer, but that's what I would say the answer is there. So
yeah, I think you put that really well across. And I just wanted to ask, in terms, like obviously with Catholicism as well, like the fact that they give you sort of a teaching of the Ten Commandments. What do you feel in terms of them to sort of like the Stoic principles, like you say, we've already covered, like the control your controllables, like memento mori, other number of things where, like, the kind of just a more, like you say, just life advice in terms of just trying to remind you are human as such, rather than what sort of the Catholicism teachings are.
Yeah. And David, when you think about the Ten Commandments, they're moral pronouncements. It wasn't thought up with human experience. It was God saying, no, you must follow this. That's why commandment number 1, you shall follow no other gods before me. That sort of seems to a lot of people today who don't practice Catholicism, it seems a bit outdated, right? Not to say that there's any value or cohesion to the Catholic doctrine of why to think that. But when it comes to the Stoic, like you said, memento mori, like the dichotomy of control, like the view from above, like the cognitive self-reflection, these types of things are discovered through reason, through experience. It's not someone saying you must practice this. It's no, philosophers have sat down and said, we, in the case of Memento Mori, we've never had an example where humans did not die. Therefore, reason would tell us we need to prepare and remind ourselves often that that time is coming. So there's two different sorts of journeys, so to speak, that get us to the conclusion of those practices. In the case of Catholicism, it's a pronouncement. In the case of Stoicism, it is an almost empiricism. It's almost observation. It's almost a rational observation of the facts that gets us to those practices in the end.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that. And in terms of going down the sort of book part, this is the biggest sort of wave of understanding Stoicism is the big thing. And do you believe there are any modern day philosophers or writers out at the moment that you would consider to be of a Stoic writer?
Oh gosh, yes. Much to the criticism of a lot of people, because David, I don't know if you've seen anything online that in the communities of Stoicism and people talking about practice. There's a huge disagreement as to whether we should even give any credence, any legitimacy to any of these modern Stoic writers, right, that claim to be Stoic. But I really enjoy Donald Robertson. If you haven't checked out his book, How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, that is a very powerful read as far as with Marcus Aurelius. Also, another recommendation that I would recommend is that is kind of underground, and I don't really know why. It's Pierre Hadot's The Inner Citadel, which was written by the French philosopher Pierre Hadot in the 90s. And it is I would say, end all be all of the modern interpretation and analysis of the Meditations. And it is a fantastic read. It's very challenging. I would not recommend The Inner Citadel for a new Stoic. I definitely would recommend How to Think Like a Roman Emperor if you're interested in the Meditations. As far as kind of for new Stoics, the Massimo Pigliucci's book, How to Be a Stoic, is a great modern analysis of, what Stoicism means and how to practice it. And he also came out with a book that I actually had the pleasure of interviewing Massimo. He has the book, A Field Guide to the Happy Life. And he basically I don't want to say reinvents, but he modernizes the Enchiridion by Epictetus, and he gives sort of a passage by passage refresher, an update in modern language of the Enchiridion. And I would definitely recommend The Field Guide to a Happy Life, probably among the others, because it is very approachable for new readers in Stoicism.
Yeah, I'll obviously look into them myself and obviously share them in the show notes. Do you believe a philosopher that I kind of listen to quite a lot is Jordan Peterson? I know obviously he's not seen as maybe Stoic, but just in terms of the way he's wrote a couple of books recently, like obviously 12 Rules for Life and his other book, and obviously his take on Christianity, he shares that very clearly in his presentations on YouTube. Would you consider him someone that has that sort of similar philosophy, or do you think he's a bit more the other side? It's funny that you say that, David, because I was just on the way back home. I was visiting some family, and I just was listening to Jordan Peterson's one of his lectures that he gave before. I think Jordan Peterson kind of went through a rough spot there dealing with depression, and this was pre-depression, and just hearing him talk about life is very refreshing. For someone like Jordan Peterson, he doesn't claim the label Stoic. With that being said, there is a lot of controversy about what people think about him, and should he be, someone who's equated with Stoic wisdom. I love hearing Jordan Peterson speak. I love hearing how calm he is, and he is very eloquent with the way that he comes across with his ideas. And to me, as a storyteller, apart from coaching and practicing Stoicism, I'm also a poet and short story writer. And the way that he communicates, to me, is very soothing. It's very attractive to listen to.
I do think that some of his ideas do have an overlap with Stoicism. One of the ideas that I think Jordan Peterson and Stoicism align is self-responsibility. And I think he gets a lot of flack from people that align themselves on the political left of kind of the left side of the spectrum, with, not being very compassionate in how he says that, because there is a bluntness to what Jordan Peterson says, no matter how calm he is in his presentation. I do think that there is a place for Jordan Peterson when it comes to self-help. The reason why I think it's valuable is because him being a clinical psychologist is really, it opens the door to bridging the gap between self-help and psychology, which I think is obviously very important to have someone of that type of education talk about that. But for me, I actually have 12 Rules of Life on my shelf. I haven't read it yet, but it's an upcoming read that I have, and I'm really excited to dig into that. Have you read that book, David, by any chance?
I have that book at home, but I haven't. I'll be honest myself, I have not delved into it. But I would certainly agree in terms of what you believe, in terms of how calm he is and how well he puts across like his message and stuff in terms of what he believes is philosophy. And I just wanted to touch again on another sort of a philosophy person that I don't know if you've read from, but in terms of touching towards the past, is Viktor Frankl. I don't know if you've ever read Man's Search for Meaning.
I have, I have read Man's Search for Meaning, and I've actually used it in the classroom with students who are learning about literature during the Holocaust. And I really enjoy Viktor Frankl. It kind of has a special spot in my life because both of my paternal grandparents were Holocaust survivors. And
Wow.
Hearing about Frankl, specifically one of the foundational things of Viktor Frankl, and saying that he noticed in the concentration camp that people who have a goal or something that they're striving towards, something to look forward to, one of the fundamental discoveries, as you probably know, David, is that he recognizes that people who have something to strive for almost had a exponential experience with overcoming the horrors of the Holocaust. I think he even talks about the survival rate of people who have that goal being much higher. And so when reading Viktor Frankl, I'm just very captivated by how he can talk about his experience so matter-of-factly, and it doesn't even seem like he's someone who came out of that experience. He's very sort of detached, which I think is very important when talking about an event like this, because David, we see today a lot of people get so emotionally impacted, and not that emotion is to be, cut off from the conversation, but we see it today that once emotion gets stirred up in a person, we see it have negative effects with conversation. And Viktor Frankl being, I think he was a psychiatrist too, psychiatrist or psychologist. Yeah. I think he just brought that to the way that he told the story. And there are a lot of Stoic undertones to what he wrote about.
Yeah, and I read that during like one of the lockdowns, and to think like, in terms of thinking, we're going for a lockdown, and yeah, I'm still able to do things that I want, yet he was in a concentration camp, and to think he survived through that, like through years and years of being kept in a camp, and just in that sort of comparison in terms of he still found a search for his meaning and his purpose at the end of that, and that's what kept him alive. And I also wanted to ask, in terms of other writers in the past, do you feel like are there any other writers that you believe that were Stoics, like, in the last sort of maybe couple of years, like 100 years, like maybe even Nietzsche was another one that I've heard a lot of quotes been used in the past?
Nietzsche, it's interesting about Nietzsche in particular is that he's the one who coined the term amor fati, of loving your fate, right? It's attributed and used in a lot of Stoic circles. Even, Nietzsche, as someone who was a huge critic of Christianity, I don't know if you've ever read The Antichrist or any of your listeners have, but The Antichrist by Friedrich Nietzsche is probably the most, and it's crazy because I get excited about this, it is probably the most devastating critique of Christianity that I have ever seen, ever. And even from, someone who used to be a practicing Christian, I still think that something like The Antichrist is really important for Christians to read, just to see what types of objections that they can overcome. And I would definitely recommend The Antichrist for anyone. The interesting thing about Nietzsche in Stoicism is he is a huge critic of Stoicism in a lot of ways. Donald Robertson, in one of his blog posts, he talks about what Nietzsche said in one of his oppositions. And I think Gregory Sadler, one of the participants in modern Stoicism, also talked about some of those critiques. So it's really interesting that the Stoic movement has adopted amor fati from a critic of Stoicism. It's very fascinating and it's very paradoxical to me. But apart from, Nietzsche, I've also his name gets away from me. He's the Earl of, I forgot. This is really embarrassing, but there was a writing by an Earl that lived, and I want to say it starts with an S, but I can definitely give you that information. He actually wrote a large treatise about what he thought about Stoic practice. And I think it survives in its entirety. And a lot of people don't know. Earl of Shaftesbury, that's it. The first Earl of Shaftesbury came to me. He actually has it's almost like his own reflections on living a Stoic life as an Earl. And a lot of people don't know about that. And I think the most modern translation is like something from like the early 1900s. I think any listener can find that online. I would definitely recommend that. It is kind of a dry read because, of course, the age of the English that is used, but it's definitely very useful nonetheless. I would definitely recommend him as a top tier read as well. So that's really one that comes to mind. As far as other writers, there's a lot of fictional work that kind of has Stoic undertones. Richard Powers' The Overstory, if you like fiction, has a ton of beautiful undertones of Stoicism in it. In some places, the art of the novel really takes your breath away, and there's not a lot of books that do that nowadays. The beginning of Melville's Moby Dick, they actually talk about Stoicism and actually talk about some of the key ideas. Of course, it gets a lot drier after those first 20 or so pages, but if you're kind of looking for a modern fictional analysis, there's a lot of themes that appear early in the book. So,
well, there's definitely worth looking to check out on that. And in terms of your own stuff, in terms of Stoic coaching, what you focus on 7 different services. Can you describe them for the listeners?
Yeah. So the programs that I have developed are resilience, habit breaking, interpersonal training, confidence, self-love, life planning, and journaling. So those are the 7 programs that I offer. The confidence, journaling, and self-love are my newest programs because I've just had to create them on demand of people saying, no, we would like something like this. Bob, can you create this for me? And it's been really kind of great in doing that. And the thing that I focus on in my coaching, and it's kind of a one-on-one session. The sessions meet for about 45 minutes to an hour, usually every week, but some of my clients, they meet, monthly, some meet every other week. It really depends on the timeline of how long you want to train on a specific technique. And with those programs, I have customized and done and researched all of the techniques in all of the major works of Stoicism that you can use to focus on whatever the program is. So like confidence, what do the Stoics say about being confident? Self-love, what do the Stoics say about our kind of some of the things we talked about earlier in this interview? What does it mean to be a human with rationality and have that sort of, role in the world? So for every program, I've researched and come up with the techniques from Stoicism to help you kind of train in that area. And I've been really fortunate, David, to have some success with that. It's been great, and kind of, following up with my clients and seeing how they're progressing, and I get a lot of joy out of it, and it's something that I look forward to, and I look forward to putting the lessons together and customizing them, and putting the trainings together. Because every single session that we do in coaching you will get a customized plan for that week or whatever interval we decide on before the next session. And that's where the growth takes place. And it's not, I should really stress, David, it's really not necessarily Stoicism that's sort of will get you through the trainings. Of course, I use Stoicism as sort of the foundation for the techniques, but it really is mental health, well-being in general. It really is. For my case, it was panic disorder. My resilience track is really great for people. I've had people that have come that have anxiety and, all other bouts of tinges of mental health issues. And even though I would never admit to be a clinical practitioner, it is a really good supplement to use if someone's looking for an application and not just a theoretical model of what to think about. It's how to actually apply it in your walk of life.
No, it's interesting to hear, like you say, about your clientele in terms of asking for other services. I think that's really good that they seek that support from you in terms of that. And has there been much support been sought in the last year? Obviously, with people at home and lockdowns, has that grown from that situation?
I think it has. I think it has grown. I've only been doing coaching since August, so all I really have is the lockdowns and stuff as a kind of a baseline. But it's really, I mean, one of the common threads is people talk about lockdown and what the effect is on human mental health. It really is. I mean, it comes up all the time. I mean, it's really not something that you can brush aside and say, oh, we can't address it. Because one of the things that the training in Stoicism in particular forces someone to do is really face your issue head on. It really does. There's no sugarcoating it. There's no kind of getting away from it. And that's something that Jordan Peterson talks about too. And that's another, relation that he has with Stoicism, is that there is no escape until you meet whatever it is that you need to meet head on. And that's what I think is beautiful about Stoicism. One of the things.
Yeah. And you also run a blog and newsletter. How regularly do you do them?
So the blog, I actually, anyone who's kind of curious can go to stoiccoach.net and go to the blog section there and to see new information. But I usually try to do a blog every few weeks. The blog is not set in stone. My Instagram page, I usually try to post every day and once on the weekends. But the blog, I usually try to do about every 3 or 4 weeks. And sometimes, like David's, if something's going on where it's like, oh man, this is really profound that I've learned in Stoicism, I'll go ahead and post that at will. And there is a kind of a link that pops up that anyone can put in their email to be updated with that, the newsletter. And it's been a really great. It's just great, man. Just to be, of course, I'm not in school as a philosophy major anymore. I can still practice it, and it still has relevance in my life. And that's really the beauty of working. I guess what I'm doing, I'm working in Stoicism, man. I mean, it's great. And I get a lot of joy out of it.
No, that's really great to hear that. And you also run a YouTube channel, which you have previously obviously had some of the more modern day Stoics on there in terms of the videos, in terms of your interviews with them. Yeah.
I've had it's crazy because I reach out and they're like, yeah, well, I'll Bob, if you want to have me. I'm like, really? Massimo Pigliucci and but yeah, I've had Massimo Pigliucci and Donald Robertson, and I've had Dr. Gregory Sadler on as well. And I recently did, David, if you don't know about Vice Admiral James Stockdale and his experiences in being a prisoner of war in Vietnam, it is phenomenal. As a Stoic practitioner, it is amazing about going through hard times. I recently posted a reading where I read his whole speech in its entirety. It's a little under an hour, so it can be done in, a sitting or two. And I for any interviews and stuff, that videos that I make, it will be on my Stoic Coach YouTube channel. And I'm really excited to get that going, because I haven't really made the full leap into the YouTube world yet. It's mostly been Instagram and Facebook. And it's really exciting. So
yeah, have you got any plans in terms of like shorter videos and stuff, in terms of more focused towards like the Stoic principles?
I really want to do those. And one of the things, David, that I've really wanted to do is something that is called it's a Stoic analysis of detaching. And there are a lot of videos that I did with, one of them I did with my former colleagues, where we did Stoic detaching videos, where we would talk about an object, like, for example, the stimulus check that some of the governments are giving people for COVID. And we would deconstruct that from a Stoic perspective by using impression, judgment, and then a reaction, which is kind of the Stoic trifold of mindfulness. And I really want to do it. The thing is time, David. I wish I had more time, but I really have plans to do that in the future.
No, that all sounds really great. In terms of as well, you also run a Facebook community group in terms of like-minded people. What do you discuss in that group?
The group is Stoic Training on Facebook. The group is still really small. It's really, there's only like 170 people there. The reason why I wanted to create the community is because so many Facebook groups and communities they talk about theoretical things. They talk about theory. And I'm reminded time and time again, as someone who wants to coach people with the application of Stoicism. Musonius Rufus, for example, in book 5, his fifth lecture, he talks about what is better, someone who can simply explain the theory very well, 100%, or someone who can actually do the practices perfectly, but can't explain it. And he ultimately comes to the decision with his interviewer, his interlocutor, that it's better to actually be able to practice with efficiency completely and not being able to explain it than being able to explain it eloquently and not being able to practice it. And that's sort of the philosophy I have behind my community that I'm trying to build online. And it's a slow process, Stoic Training. But I'm really trying to post questions and kind of get people to talk about more of the life stories and not so much of, Epictetus says this. What critique do you think that this is the right translation? I really want to get from that to my life. I dealt with situation X. How would I go forward in living virtuously in that situation? That's really, really my that's really my dream of having a community that talks about life and how to apply it to life.
That's good. And Bob, I have a few final questions for you. And the first one is, what does it mean to be human?
Oh man, it's saving the easiest ones for last. Man, if I had to sum it up in kind of a neat nutshell, I would say a lot of you're born, you have a lot of ambiguity. There's a lot of uncertainty as a human. You live struggling to find out what your reason to live is. You struggle to find what the application in order the steps to maintain that status or to achieve that status. Then you reflect on trying to make the future better for your individuals around you. And then death. What the Stoics say, the life cycle of getting through life. And that, of course, is a very compact nutshell. And that, we could talk about it for hours, but I really think one of the main things about being human is finding your identity. It's what the Stoics call living according to nature. And what they mean by living according to nature, there's kind of a 2-level analysis. On the first level, you have living according to sort of physical limitations. Nature has given us gravity. It has given us it has given us inertia. It has given us finitude. But on another level, nature has given us each an identity to find, to create, to pursue. And this is another thing about where kind of Stoicism overlaps with Jordan Peterson, is that it's up to the individual to find out what that is. And it's really difficult to do. And a lot of people are afraid to make that jump into finding out what our particular purpose in the universe is. And that's, in a nutshell, that's what the Stoics and what I think about human nature and what a human is.
Yeah, that's awesome in terms of like just finding who you are. I think that's a really good way of summing up, and obviously touching on nature of being a human. And lastly, I'd like to ask is what makes you stay humble?
Failure, man. I really think that is I think that failure is one of the most helpful things. There was a passage by Epictetus, I think, or it might have been his teacher, Musonius Rufus. But one of them said, they pity the person who has never experienced failure because they have not had a chance to practice that rebound, to practice that inner dialogue of a person in order to get up on their feet again. They have never experienced that. And that really comes out in a lot of the dialogues of Stoicism. Failure, being a poet and a short story writer, 99% of my writings that I send out are rejected. That's just a fact of it. And one of the things that kind of I kind of chuckle because Kurt Vonnegut, not the greatest, most kindest person, a little, misogynistic and a little bit, nutty, the writer Kurt Vonnegut, but he had a great wisdom about how to view failure. He almost saw it as a rite of passage as a writer. One of the interviews I think he had with PBS, he said that all the rejection that he received as a writer, he said that he had so much rejection that he could probably wallpaper his entire house twice with the letters he received of rejection. And that was really kind of impactful for me, because here you have one of the greatest, the guy who wrote Catch-22. You have, not Catch-22. Wow. Who wrote a lot of these famous, novels that talks about what it means to be human and how to go through failures. And here we have someone who's so successful, who really can tell you that failure is something to humble you. And please don't send me angry emails and say that I misattributed Vonnegut for the guy who wrote Catch-22. But it's really kind of great to see someone who has a story of humility that really kind of shows how failure got him through not only staying humble, but also transgressing those sort of pitfalls that can make us a little bit cocky in life, which I think is always good to have those checks for balance. Always.
Wow. Yeah, I like that about failure. And Bob, I just want to give you a platform now, just for people that might have been, obviously from listening or watching this, where do they need to go to discover your Stoic Coach?
You can always reach out to me and check out my services at www.stoiccoach.net. The website has a lot of information. The website has all of the programs. You can sign up for a free consultation. It's a really it'll be just like this, what I'm doing with you, David. It'll be just like getting together as two people talking about Stoicism and how you can improve. Very sort of laid back. The other way that you can contact me is I'm really active on Instagram, and that's how we connected. Yeah. And you can always check me out at The Stoic Coach on Instagram. And I always try to post insights of Stoicism to get you through and to apply to life. And those are my two main outlets. So the website and Instagram. And David, how do you just I know this is kind of going back, but How do you stay humble? What is your magic ingredient? I'm always intrigued by what people have to say about that.
I just find like in terms of just like my surroundings and stuff sometimes, like in terms of my work and stuff, seeing like how lucky I am in terms of my life, in terms of where, like what I have and stuff, and just to remind myself of them things, like not to be materialistic and stuff, and just be appreciative of the people that you're around and stuff like that, that help keep me sort of stay humble in that sense, and my family as well.
I love it. Some gratitude there. Some
Yeah.
gratitude. Like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Slaughterhouse Five. Slaughterhouse Five is what Kurt Vonnegut wrote. Sorry. I had to correct that. I had to correct it before. Man, I can't. That's big dishonor of misattributing. But all right.
But yeah, thank you, Bob. Honestly, like I've really appreciated this conversation about Stoicism, because I have to be honest, you've like blown my mind with your knowledge and stuff like that. And I hope that this conversation might lead to people discovering more about Stoicism, and I think it will benefit their lives hugely. So I want to thank you for giving me your time and your knowledge today.
Yeah, thanks, David. I really appreciate it, and nothing better than talking about Stoicism on a Saturday afternoon.
Thank you for staying humble with me, Bob.
Thanks.